You are now listening to Mark the Medium on Mark's Unexplained World on Hinckley Community Radio, a non-profit podcast radio station. Tonight's episode is about Linda Hazzard, otherwise known as the Starvation Doctor.
Linda Laura Hazzard, or otherwise known as the Starvation Doctor, was what we now know an American quack, swindler and convicted serial killer. She became noted for her promotion and use of fasting, pummeling and hour-long enemas as treatments for her own patients. Back in 1911, Hazzard was found guilty of manslaughter in the state of Washington and was sentenced to between 2 and 20 years of hard labour for killing at least 15 people for financial gain at a sanitarium she operated near Seattle in the early 20th century. In 1916, she was released on parole after only serving the 2 years of her sentence, and later, for reasons still unknown, she received a full pardon from the Governor of Washington, one Ernest Lister. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in again and listening to Mark's Unexplained World. If it is your first time, then where have you been for the last year? My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a psychic medium, a Wicca, and a man whose hobbies include eating, and, well, just eating. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the rather disturbing story about Linda Hazzard, who became known as the Starvation Doctor. And this week's necessary disclaimer: this story is a tale that involves serial murder and starvation, so may be upsetting to some. You all listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case still remain true. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, these days I tend to find that reading a script is now probably my second. So, back we go to the story. From the dictionary, fasting is described as the abstention from eating and sometimes even drinking. Well, I can tell you I will not be trying that any day soon, for sure. From a purely psychological context, fasting may refer to the metabolic status of a person who has not eaten overnight, or to the body's metabolic state achieved after complete digestion and absorption of a meal. Metabolic changes in the fasting state begin after absorption of a meal, which is typically about 3 to 5 hours after eating. A diagnostic fast refers to the prolonged fasting from 1 to 100 hours, depending on the age of the patient, conducted under observation to facilitate the investigation of a health complication, usually something like hypoglycemia. Got there in the end. Hypoglycemia. Many people may also have to fast as part of a medical procedure or a checkup, such as preceding a colonoscopy or any other major surgery, or even before some certain medical tests, such as a fasting blood test, which is quite common. Intermittent fasting is also a technique that is sometimes more widely used for weight loss that incorporates regular fasting into a person's daily dietary schedule. Fasting may also be part of a religious ritual, often associated with specifically scheduled fast days, as determined by the type of religion, such as Ramadan. Fasting has also often been used to make a political statement, to protest, or to bring awareness to a cause. A hunger strike is also a method of non-violent resistance in which participants fast as an act of political protest, or to provoke feelings of guilt, or to achieve a goal such as a change of policy. Anyway, more about the lady in question, Laura Hazzard. Hazzard was born in Carver, Minnesota. She was the eldest of 7 children to parents Susanna Neal and Montgomery Burfield. Linda Hazzard had no medical degree but was licensed to practice medicine in the state of Washington through a loophole that grandfathered in some practitioners of alternative medicine without degrees. Linda Hazzard had one major fear in life: nyctophobia, a fear of the dark. She also had a very mixed up personal life. After leaving her husband in 1898, she went on to marry her second husband, Sam Hazzard, in 1903. According to the Washington State Archives, Sam Hazzard had a full history of drinking and swindling. He later served 2 years in prison for bigamy, mainly due to the fact that he was still married to his previous wife at the time of his and Linda's wedding. According to Hazzard's book, titled The Science of Fasting, she studied under Edward Hooker Dewey, MD, who is best known as an American physician. Hooker was also a well-known pioneer of therapeutic fasting and the inventor of the no breakfast plan diet. Linda Hazzard developed a fasting method that she claimed was a panacea for all manner of illnesses, ridding the body of all the toxins that caused imbalances within our bodies. On an interesting side note, a panacea is any supposed remedy that is claimed to cure all diseases and prolong life indefinitely. In Greek mythology, Panacea was one of the daughters of the Greek god of medicine, Asclepius. Is that right? Asclepius? I think his name's Asclepius. Something like that. Along with her 4 sisters, each of whom performed one aspect of health care on the body. Over the course of Linda Hazzard's career, she wrote 3 books about what she claimed to be the science behind fasting and how it could cure disease. The first book was titled Fasting for the Cure of Disease, written in 1908, followed by the Diet in Disease and Systematic Cleansing, both written in 1917. A 5th revised and amplified edition of the first book, Fasting for the Cure of Disease, was published in 1927 under the title Scientific Fasting, the Ancient and Modern Key to Health. Linda Hazzard had only had a little training in the medical world as an osteopathic nurse. Primarily, she did not have a medical degree of any kind. But because there was a legal loophole in Washington state law, This meant that she was allowed to practice as a doctor mainly due to a clause that concerned alternative medicine. The murderess would often use the title doctor, despite the fact that she had no formal degree in medicine. This was probably done as a way to fool her victims into believing her fasting cure. She once snapped back at a reporter, and I quote,
"I have told you time again, it is Dr. Hazzard. Mrs. Hazzard is my mother-in-law."
Linda Hazzard was not your stereotypical murderer who relied on poisons or bludgeoning equipment to carry out her murders. Having the gift of the gab, she would manage to gain complete psychological control over her victims. She would declare that all diseases could be cured by fasting, whether a patient suffered from headaches, infections, or even cancer. The doctor promoted her theories by using vague jargon or doublespeak to try and impress her patients about the digestive system, and I quote,
"Impaired digestion causes impure blood that can lead to illnesses."
Hazzard basically used what is known as quack science to suggest that extreme fasting was a way to cure all ailments. Using a combination of fake science and personal manipulation, the so-called doctor managed to convince her patients to slowly starve themselves to death while they resided at her luxurious retreat. Linda Hazzard had established a sanitarium called Wilderness Heights, which was located in Ulala, Washington, where inpatients fasted for days, weeks, or even months on a diet consisting of a small amount of tomato, asparagus juice, and if they were lucky, the occasional orange juice. While some patients survived and publicly endorsed Linda Hazzard's methods, dozens of patients died under her care. Hazzard claimed that the deceased had succumbed to undisclosed or hitherto undiagnosed illnesses such as cancer or cirrhosis of the liver. Her opponents claim that they all died of starvation, with local residents in Ulala referring to the sanitarium as Starvation Heights. Hazzard also encouraged her patients to take even more extreme measures by making them receive daily enemas. These would last for several hours and required at least 12 quarts of water. That's about 13.5 litres today. And on another uncomfortable side note, an enema administration is a technique that is used to stimulate stool evacuation. It is a liquid treatment most commonly used to relieve severe constipation. The process helps to push bodily waste out of the rectum when you cannot do so on your own. Now that sounds bad enough, but yes, there is more. Arguably, the most terrifying aspect of Linda Hazzard's fasts was the daily massage, during which she would reportedly beat her fists against her patients' backs and foreheads, all while shouting, and I quote,
"Eliminate! Eliminate!"
After a short break, we'll take a look at some of the victims and the possible motives that the Starvation Doctor had behind these murders.
This show is brought to you by courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times and over 16s only, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could, and has, taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Why not pay them a visit to see for yourself? Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective discounts. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only £3.99 to keep you up to date with what's coming up at the centre.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 and was the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Now, over 23 years old, hundreds of ghost hunts join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experience worth remembering. If you have never been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them on an event to see what it's all about? Fright Nights currently operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues with their teams of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. You are guaranteed a quality night of ghost hunting unequalled by any other company. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering discounts and exclusive event invitations. And they can host private events for you and your friends, clubs or work colleagues. They have also expanded their new Friends of Fright Nights pages with many more new things to come. So why not book early with a small deposit so you don't miss out? The balance is due 28 days prior to the event. Contact them on 07852 998 628 or email at frightnightsevents@gmail.com. That's frightnightsevents@gmail.com. Or why not visit their website www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn a lot more about them and the opportunities they have available. You can also visit their many social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they have been to and what's coming up in the future. They look forward to seeing you soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
Probably the best remembered patients of Linda Hazzard are a pair of British sisters named Claire and Dorothea, otherwise known as Dora, Williamson, the orphan daughters of an English army officer. The girls were orphaned early in their lives, and as a result, they had developed a mild case of hypochondria. According to author Greg Olson in his book Starvation Heights, the sisters first saw an advert for Linda Hazzard's book in a newspaper while staying in a hotel in Victoria, British Columbia called the Lush Empress. The sisters were big fans of what we call today alternative medicine, and they had already become vegetarians and stopped wearing tight corsets in an attempt to improve their health. Though the sisters weren't seriously ill, the pair felt that they were suffering from a variety of minor ailments, with Dora complaining of swollen glands and rheumatic pains, while Claire had been informed by another doctor that she had a dropped uterus. Almost as soon as they learned of Linda Hazzard's Institute of Natural Therapeutics in Oolala, they were both determined to undergo what Claire called Hazzard's most beautiful treatment. The Institute's cosy, quiet countryside setting appealed to both Dora and Claire almost as much as the claimed medical benefits of Hazzard's treatment. Sorry about that. They dreamed of horses grazing in the fields, birds singing in the trees, and freshly cut local vegetable broths made with the produce from local farms. However, after signing up for the treatment, when the women reached Seattle, they were told the sanitarium in Oolala wasn't quite ready. Instead, Linda Hazzard set them up in an apartment on Seattle's Capitol Hill, where she began feeding them a broth made from canned tomatoes. Ugh, certainly not one of my favourites. They each had 1 cup of canned tomatoes twice a day and absolutely nothing else. They were then given hour-long enemas in the bathtub, which was covered with canvas supports for when the girls started to faint during the treatment. This treatment was administered to both girls twice every day. The women were starved, pummelled, and subjected to these hour-long enemas given by Hazzard herself. Slowly, they became too weak to even walk, and other residents of the apartment block would hear the girls either crying or screaming in pain. All this attention was the last thing that Hazzard wanted, so she moved the girls via gurneys to the unfinished facility in Oolala. According to one worried neighbour, by the time Dora and Claire Williamson were transferred to the unfinished facility in Oolala, a mere 2 months later, they both weighed around 70 pounds each. That's 5 stone or 31.75 kilos. Residents of the apartment complex mentioned how frail and sickly the girls had become, but they did nothing to stop what Hazzard was doing to them. Residents of the apartment complex mentioned how frail and sickly the girls had become, but they did nothing to stop what Hazzard was doing to them. Their family members would have been very worried too if any of them had known what was going on, but the sisters were used to the family disapproving of their health quests, so they had not told anyone where they were going. In Oolala, the locals nicknamed the sanitarium as Starvation Heights, due to the starving and skeletal patients that would be seen wandering around and even begging for food or some other sort of help. Meanwhile, the girls were becoming delirious from malnutrition, which was the exact moment that Linda Hazzard was looking for. She wrote new wills for the sisters and appointed herself as their legal guardian and sole beneficiary of their estate, at the time valued at over $500,000, which is the equivalent of just over $12,500 today. Million. Sorry. And she also signed over the deeds to their land holdings. And as if that wasn't enough, Linda Hazzard then stole the girls' jewellery and valuables, wore their clothes, and even prevented the sisters from seeing each other. Somehow, Dora was able to send a telegram to her former governors and nanny named Margaret Conway that they had. I'll try that one again. And governess and nanny named Margaret Conway that they had back in England, asking for her to come to their aid in Olala immediately. But sadly, by the time Margaret Conway arrived in Olala, Claire had died. After Claire's death, the Hazzards, both Linda and her husband Sam, being true to form, tried to brainwash Dora into believing that she was insane and unable to care for herself. They also tried to get guardianship so they could control the Williamsons' estate before she passed away. When Claire died, her weight was less than 50 pounds. That's 22.5 kilos. The nanny was horrified at what Claire Williamson looked like, and her sister, Dorothea, was almost as bad. At the time, Dorothea weighed less than 60 pounds, that's around 27 kilos, and was far too weak to move or, in fact, do much of anything. Margaret Conway got nowhere with trying to convince Linda Hazzard to let Dora Williamson leave. Her position as a servant hindered her, as she often felt much too timid to contradict those in a class above her, and Hazzard was well known for her terrible power over people. She seemed to hypnotise people with her loud voice and fixed glare. In fact, some had wondered if Hazzard's interest in spiritualism, theosophy and the occult had given her some strange abilities, with some folk thinking that perhaps she hypnotised people into actually starving themselves to death. In the end, it took the arrival of one of the sisters' uncles, John Herbert, who Margaret had managed to summon from Portland, Oregon, to help free Dora from her torture. After some haggling, John Herbert paid Linda Hazzard nearly $1,000 to let Dora leave the property. While she couldn't save Claire, the nanny, Margaret Conway, was able to have Dorothea removed from Linda Hazzard's care, and once the frail and dying Dora Williamson was in Seattle, she reported what happened to the police. But it took the involvement of the British Vice Consul in nearby Tacoma, a Mr. Lucien Agassiz, as well as a murder trial to avenge Claire's death. As John Herbert and Lucien Agassiz would discover once they started researching the case, Hazzard was connected to the deaths of several other very wealthy individuals. Many had signed large portions of their estates over to Linda Hazzard before their deaths. One former state legislator, Louis E. Radar, I don't know where I got Richard from, I really don't, even owned the property where the sanitarium was located, with its original name being Wilderness Heights. Louis E. Radar died in May 1911 after being moved from a hotel near Pike Place Market to an undisclosed location when authorities tried to question him. Another British patient was John Ivan Flux. He had gone to America to buy a ranch, yet died with only $70 to his name. The Smithsonian reports that he passed away after fasting for 53 days straight, and the rest of his money had mysteriously all been spent. And a New Zealand man named Eugene Wakeling was also reported to have shot himself while fasting under Linda Hazzard's care. Hazzard had somehow gotten herself appointed administrator of his estate and drained it of all funds. Linda Hazzard has similarly swindled the sisters Claire and Dora Williamson in the same way as all her other victims. In all, at least a dozen people are said to have starved to death under Linda Hazzard's care, although some claim the total figure could be quite significantly higher. When the case finally went to court, it caused quite a media frenzy. Hazzard's defence was that the witnesses were all lying, and that the medical establishment had conspired against her out of jealousy since she cured patients that they couldn't help. However, despite this, her former patients were not allowed to testify. She tried to influence witnesses and make statements for the newspapers, but to no avail, as she was proved to have forged both Claire's will and as well as the last entry in Claire's diary. She was eventually convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to between 2 to 20 years of hard labour at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. However, she was released on parole after serving only the first 2 years, and not only that, but she managed to gain a full pardon from the Governor of Washington on the proviso that she was forced to leave the United States. As to how, or why, or how she managed to gain this full pardon is somewhat of a mystery, as I can't seem to find any details throughout my research. When Linda Hazzard was released, she travelled off to New Zealand and practised as an osteopath and dietitian for a further 5 years. Eventually, she was found guilty of practising medicine without a licence and was fined just £5 plus any court costs. The next year, she was right back in Olala building a much bigger and better sanatorium. Although her Washington licence had been revoked, she managed to get around the law by calling her sanatorium a school of health. The downfalls of small print, eh? She continued to supervise fasting at this school of health for about 15 years until the building eventually burned down. 3 years after that, in 1938, she died. The cause of death? Trying to cure herself by fasting. I think that's what you call karma. So, why didn't the Williams sisters realise what was happening to them? When I read Greg Olson's book, Starvation Heights, the one thing that puzzled me was how the sisters couldn't see that they were dying. I mean, did Linda Hazzard really have that much of a gift of the gab to influence and convince a dying person that what was happening to them was actually an advantage to their health and making them better? When the sisters first went to consult with Linda Hazzard, they were two fit, healthy young ladies, walking around enjoying themselves, seeing the world, and then very soon after a consultation, they were too weak to even walk to the toilet. They must have been able to notice that their flesh was melting away and that 50 pounds was an unhealthy weight for an adult female at their age. Were they really completely under the spell of Hazzard's strong personality? And did they truly believe the starvation treatment was working and that they were getting better? Now, I'm not a doctor or psychiatrist, obviously, but one thing I did notice in Olson's book was that the girls used to ignore the advice of other family members when it came to them trying to sort out their own health. And as I said earlier, soon after the break of this podcast, the girls were orphaned early in their lives, and as a result, they developed a mild case of hypochondria. And let us not also forget that as well as Linda Hazzard being a serial killer, she was also a quack or con man or con woman, or presumably con person these days. So maybe Hazzard had caught on to the girls' hypochondria, and took full advantage of their, what she would have considered, weakness. I just can't get my head around the fact that someone can lie there slowly dying by starvation, but at the same time still be convinced that what was happening to them was actually better for their health. But again, like I said earlier, I'm not a medic, just a humble podcaster giving his opinion. Linda Hazzard stood up for her gender and challenged the male-dominated medical establishment of her day, which was a bold move. Serial killers are usually male, so she already stands out as an exception to the rule. Her treatments were every bit as lethal as bullets, and arguably much worse because of the slower deaths, and in fact led to more suffering. According to the magazine Psychology Today, there are far fewer female serial murderers than there are males, with around 15% women in comparison to 85% males. It is also true that you aren't as likely to see a woman torturing her victim or having sex with a dead corpse, the typical kinds of gory details that make headlines and sell movies. In fact, sex and pleasure are likely to be much farther down on the motivation list for a female serial killer than they are for men. Females tend to take a more pragmatic approach to killing people off. Female serial killers tend to kill more for profit and power, which was definitely part of Linda Hazzard's profile. Many people let the Williams sisters down. From Linda Hazzard, the quack doctor, and her husband Sam, to the nurses who assisted with patient care, and of course not forgetting the prison system and the governor who granted Linda Hazzard her pardon. The list goes on, but I'm not here to judge, just to inform. Today, all that remains of her sanitarium is a 7-foot-tall concrete tower and the ruins of the building's foundation, both now completely choked with ivy.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show 56, we are going to be looking at the silent twins. June Gibbons and Jennifer Gibbons were identical twins who grew up in Wales, the United Kingdom. They were the daughters of Caribbean immigrants Gloria and Aubrey Gibbons. The Gibbons family moved from Barbados to the United Kingdom in the early 1960s as part of the Windrush generation. They became known as the Silent Twins because they only actually communicated with each other. In their later teenage years, the twins began using drugs and alcohol. In 1981, the girls committed a number of crimes, including vandalism, petty theft and arson, which led to their being admitted to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security mental health hospital in Berkshire. The twins were sentenced to indefinite detention under the Mental Health Act of 1983.
This show was written by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes, and Denise Pula. With special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley, and a big thanks to everyone for listening. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.